over $2 billion in stolen gold, one African president who refused to kneel, and a single decision that sparked a global war of silence, lies, and blood. When Ibrahim Traoré uncovered a ship loaded with unmarked gold, quietly docked off West Africa's coast, he wasn't just facing smugglers. He was standing against a hidden empire, corrupt businessmen, foreign agents, even leaders of friendly nations. And when he tried to return the gold to the people, they tried to return him to the grave. But here's the truth. He didn't flinch. What followed was betrayal inside his own palace, an assassination plot in broad daylight, and a final stand that would echo far beyond Burkina Faso. Now ask yourself, what would you risk if everything your people had ever lost was finally within reach? The city of Ouagadougou woke slowly, as if it too needed a moment to gather itself before facing another uncertain day. The first light crept gently across the rooftops, painting the rusted tin and terracotta tiles in a golden hue, warm like honey but thin like memory. The morning air was still, almost reverent, as if the entire capital held its breath. Birds stirred high above the city, slicing through the amber sky in lazy arcs. Street vendors began unpacking faded crates. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled out an old love song, the voice trembling with static. Soft, fragile, familiar. But not all was calm. Inside the presidential compound, guarded by high walls and men who had forgotten how to sleep with both eyes closed, President Ibrahim Traoré sat completely still. The world outside stirred, but in here, it had stopped moving. His desk was bare, except for a single manila folder with the words Priorité Absolue stamped in red across its cover. He hadn't touched his coffee. He hadn't blinked in a while. The ceiling fan above him whirred in slow circles, pushing warm air that couldn't cool the tension, slowly tightening around his shoulders. Across from him, a floor-to-ceiling window framed the sunrise like a painting, except he wasn't looking at it. His eyes were fixed on the first line of the report. Unmarked cargo ship sighted. Location, Gulf of Guinea. No transponder, no registration. The ship's name was handwritten beneath it, Golden Arrow. He said it aloud, quietly, testing the weight of it. Golden Arrow. It sounded beautiful, almost poetic, the kind of name you'd expect to see on postcards or tourist brochures. But nothing about this ship was beautiful. It had no country, no declared cargo, no reason to be drifting silently near West Africa's coast. No one knew it was coming. No one had announced its departure. And yet here it was, anchored in shadow near an abandoned port used long ago by colonial merchants. "Who sent this?" Traoré muttered, flipping to the second page. Captain Soro, trusted, loyal, trained under fire, not flattery. If he said something was wrong, it was already far worse than anyone imagined. The report was brief, but devastating. Satellite scans suggest metallic containers in cargo hold, likely gold unmarked. No shipping logs. Smugglers suspected. Possible collusion with local operators. Estimated value, uncertain, but high. Gold. Again. Always gold. Traoré leaned back in his chair and exhaled, long and slow. He remembered the stories, how villagers in the north had found gold in shallow riverbeds, only to watch it disappear into foreign hands. How children played near mines they'd never benefit from. How entire regions were rich in minerals but starving in silence. Gold wasn't just metal here. It was a wound, shiny, bleeding, and never healing. He stood and walked to the window. The city was now awake. Motorbikes weaving between cars, women balancing buckets on their heads, schoolboys kicking a deflated ball in the dust. They smiled. They shouted. They lived. But they never knew what was being stolen from them each day. And now, this ship, quiet, invisible, and full of the very wealth their ancestors had died for. Suddenly, the stillness of the room felt unbearable. He turned, picked up the red phone, and dialed a number he knew by heart. Captain Soro answered before the second ring. "Report confirmed," Soro said, voice tight. "She's hiding. Lights off. No communications. No flag. She doesn't want to be found." I want eyes on her. Now no contact. Just watch. Stay invisible, Traoré ordered. A pause. Understood. The line went dead. Traoré stared at the folder in his hand, then slowly closed it. What haunted him wasn't the ship itself. It was the silence surrounding it. No media, no noise, no rumors. For a ship this suspicious to exist without anyone talking meant only one thing. The wrong people already knew. The second page of the dossier felt heavier than paper had any right to be. Lines of stark black text marched across it like silent soldiers, each one stripping another illusion from Ibrahim Traoré's mind. Satellite photos were annotated in the margins, pale rectangles against a dark deck, stamped with rough estimates. Container 1, 12.4 tons, all dust. Container 7, 8.1 tons, all bullion. Beneath each annotation, a short parenthetical code identified the original mine site in Burkina Faso's western provinces. Names only someone who had walked those red-soiled pits would recognize. A third page traced the money. Wire transfers snaked from an offshore bank in Nassau to a shaded holding company in Luxembourg, then vanished into a boutique financier in Abidjan. At the bottom, Captain Soro had typed an understated conclusion. Probable coordination between domestic intermediaries and foreign buyers. Estimated value, low end, 2.3 billion US dollars. Traoré read the sentence twice. 2.3 billion. It was more than his Ministry of Education's annual budget, more than every hospital in the country cost to run for 5 years. And it was floating offshore, guarded by mercenaries in borrowed uniforms, waiting for a moonless night to disappear forever. He tried to steady his breathing, but the next paragraph cut even deeper. Names, some only hinted at by initials, linked respected Burkinabe business magnates to French logistics firms and a mining consultancy registered in Toronto. A scribbled note from Soro read, Project Sandglass. Code phrase in intercepted emails. Intent, extract gold while maintaining plausible deniability. It wasn't smuggling, it was extraction warfare, the slow bleed of a nation masked behind invoices and courtesy titles. Traoré pictured villages he'd toured in campaign season. Women balancing yellow jerry cans, children chasing broken tires, miners coughing dust so thick it turned the spit in their mouths the color of soot. Those people never saw a coin of the wealth beneath their feet. Now someone wanted to whisk that wealth away, for the price of a few forged signatures and enough bribes to keep the border post blind. He closed the dossier and pressed his palms against the desk, muscles in his forearms twitching. Anger threatened to flare, but he'd learned young, back in the bush years fighting militias, that rage without direction was a flame that burned the hand that held it. Still, it shook him that men with perfect French accents and polished Oxford shoes could call this business. A soft knock broke his focus. The aide who entered was barely 30, eyes wide at being summoned so early. Mr. President, the finance minister is on line 1. Tell him to hold, Traoré said. He picked up the handset himself, dialing a secure extension that linked directly to the chief of internal intelligence. When the line clicked, he spoke in a low, measured tone. Find out which customs officers inspected the Golden Arrow's last declared shipment, if any. Freeze their assets. Quietly. He paused. And pull the travel logs of every executive listed under Société Minérale d'Afrique. Board members, spouses, golf buddies, everyone. I want movement patterns by noon. He hung up before the director could offer formalities. Then, almost against his will, his gaze drifted back to the window. The sun was higher now, casting long fingers of light across the city. Vendors arranged mango pyramids in neat rows. Schoolgirls in faded uniforms linked arms on their walk to class. None of them knew their country's marrow was being siphoned onto rust-stained decks. A memory surfaced, his grandmother's voice soft yet firm, telling him that gold in Moor language was yare, both treasure and heart. Lose your yare, she'd warned, and you lose the drumbeat that keeps your spirit alive. The golden arrow wasn't stealing ore, it was stealing the drumbeat. Traoré straightened, shoulders squaring as resolve eclipsed frustration. He pressed a thumbprint onto the biometric pad at his desk. A hidden drawer slid open, revealing a slim red notebook. Inside, under the heading Non-Negotiables, he wrote a single line in crisp ink: "No gold leaves Burkina Faso without the people seeing it shine." He capped the pen and replaced the notebook. The rage was still there, white hot, coiled, but now it had a target and a timetable. Tonight he would draft the first phase of Operation Golden Justice with Soro. Tomorrow the smugglers might still believe they held every advantage. Let them believe it a little longer, he thought. Truth would hit harder when it arrived unannounced. He exhaled once, long and slow, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Because buried beneath the weight of billions in stolen metal was an even heavier certainty. If a nation's lifeblood was being robbed, the veins would not stay silent. And he, for one, was done pretending not to hear their pulse. The storm, he realized, was no longer on the horizon. It had already set anchor, and the first thunder was about to break. The phone call was short, sharp, precise, and spoken in the kind of tone that left no room for misunderstanding. "Don't engage," Traoré said, his voice steady despite the storm building behind it. "Just watch. Eyes only. I'll handle the rest." On the other end of the secure line, Captain Soro responded with a low affirmation, his voice taut with quiet tension. "Understood, Mr. President." No further instructions were needed. Between the two men, communication was a refined art, born not of politics, but of years in the shadows, where loyalty was proven not by speeches but by survival. The line went dead, and Traoré sat for a moment in stillness. Outside, the day had fully broken. The city now pulsed with movement, horns, footsteps, market haggling. But in this room, silence held command. He knew that what he had just set in motion was not just a surveillance operation. It was the first move in a game that would be played in the dark, without official sanction, outside of press conferences and international summits. A war of shadows had begun, and it would not be won with tanks or treaties. He stood and moved toward the cabinet near the far wall. Inside, behind false documents and hollow books, was a small metal case. From it, he removed a single envelope sealed with red wax, no label, no insignia. But Soro would recognize it the moment it arrived. Inside was a handwritten directive, concise, elegant, and without loopholes. Phase 1, identify. Phase 2, document. Phase 3, expose. There would be no arrests yet, no grand confrontation, no fireworks. Not now. That would come later, when the enemy believed they were safe, when they had shown their hands, when denial was no longer an option. For now, they would watch. They would listen. They would let the rot reveal its roots. In the coastal outpost where Soro had stationed his most trusted team, encrypted messages began to flow. Old surveillance drones were powered up. Civilian disguises were retrieved. A silent shift occurred. Soldiers becoming dock workers, operatives slipping into barrooms, informants waking from months of silence. The eyes of the state narrowed their focus onto a single floating ghost, the Golden Arrow. Traoré returned to his desk, reread the last line of Soro's report, and placed it back into the drawer with calm finality. This wasn't just about stopping a theft. It was about reclaiming a story long hijacked by outsiders, rewritten in boardrooms and broadcast as inevitability. Not this time. As night began its slow descent over the city once more, a different kind of dawn broke. Quiet, hidden, but blinding to those it would one day reach. Far from the palace, on the deck of a ship where no name was painted, where no crew kept records, the first of many hidden cameras blinked to life. And for the first time, the truth began to record itself. Soon the world would see what gold looked like when it was stolen in silence. The night air clung to the skin like damp wool as the three men stepped out of the battered truck and approached the dock. No names, no insignias, no rank, just oil-stained overalls, frayed boots, and faces smudged with grease and dust. They blended seamlessly with the world of forgotten laborers, men paid to disappear beneath the machinery of ports and shipping lanes. To anyone watching, they were just another trio of exhausted workers on another long night shift. But behind their dirt-caked eyes were the sharp gazes of Burkina Faso's elite reconnaissance unit, handpicked by Captain Soro himself. Private Amadou, the youngest, walked slightly behind the others, his right hand twitching near the hem of his jacket where a compact transmitter was taped to his side. Next to him, Sergeant Kareem carried a dented toolbox. Inside, not only were there worn-out spanners and rusted wrenches, but nestled between false compartments were two micro-cameras the size of shirt buttons. Leading the group was Lieutenant Diallo, tall, broad-shouldered, silent. He didn't just play the part of a laborer, he became it. Every gesture was purposeful, every glance unassuming. He had done this before, in ports far more dangerous than this one. The ship loomed above them like a carcass of rust and secrecy. The Golden Arrow had no flag, no visible registration, and its hull bore patches from different countries, like a snake that had shed too many skins. Its crew, mostly silent men in civilian clothes with mismatched accents, eyed the newcomers with suspicion as they climbed the gangway. A short man with a crooked jaw stepped forward, arms crossed. "Who sent you?" Diallo grunted, wiping his forehead with a stained cloth. "Supervisor Musa," he said, voice low and annoyed. "Said this heap needs to be checked before first light. Valve pressure reports came in funny." Crooked Jaw narrowed his eyes. "Musa didn't say anything to us." "That's your problem," Diallo shot back, already brushing past. "You want to risk fines when inspectors come around? Be my guest. We're just doing our damn job." The bluff worked. A few seconds of awkward silence passed. Then the crewman waved them through with a shrug. 15 minutes, he muttered. "Then you're out." "Won't need more than 10, Kareem replied, lifting the toolbox and heading below deck. Inside, the ship's bowels were dimly lit and reeked of oil, mold, and something older, something metallic and faintly rotten. The floor groaned under their steps as they descended into the cargo hold. Rows upon rows of industrial containers stood like silent tombs, unmarked and uniform, each sealed with thick steel latches and guarded by nothing but the illusion of legality. This was it. The beating heart of a heist masked as trade. Kareem knelt by the bulkhead and opened the toolbox, his fingers moving with mechanical precision. One by one, he handed out the cameras. Diallo slipped his into a crack in the paneling, adjusting the angle until it captured the center of the hold. Amadou moved toward the rear of the chamber, ducking behind a stack of crates to plant his device beneath a rusty pipe. Each camera had a 12-hour battery and was connected via a low-frequency transmitter to a receiver Sorrow had hidden in a shack across the harbor. "Two down," Diallo whispered. "One more behind the control cabinet." They moved like smoke, present but unseen. Every second ticked like a drumbeat in their skulls. They couldn't afford a single mistake. Kareem approached the final location, a shadowy nook partially obscured by hanging cables. He reached up, clipped the camera into place, and gave the signal. Done. But just as they turned to leave, a metallic clang echoed from above. Footsteps, voices, low, tense, and moving closer. "Someone's coming," Amadou hissed, ducking behind a bulkhead. 3 crewmen entered the hold, laughing nervously. One of them kicked a nearby container. "You know how much is in here?" he whispered to the others. "More than we'll ever see again." "Gold dust. Whole damn barrels. Shut up," another snapped. "We're not supposed to talk about it." The team stayed frozen, breaths shallow, muscles coiled. After a few long minutes, the crew left as suddenly as they came. The danger passed, but the truth remained. Gold. Not rumors. Not suspicions. Confirmation. They exited silently, tools in hand, faces unreadable. Back on the dock, the truck waited with engine running. As soon as the doors closed, Diallo activated the encrypted feed. On a small screen, grainy images flickered to life. Footage of sealed containers, overheard whispers, shadows hiding something too large to bury. The eyes were open now, and they would not blink. The footage arrived just after midnight. Transmitted through a bouncing series of encrypted relays, the signal traveled from the hidden receiver near the docks, through a military uplink station deep inland, and finally into the presidential compound, landing silently on a secured tablet resting on Ibrahim Traoré's desk. He had been waiting for it, sitting in the dark, a single desk lamp casting long shadows across the room like creeping fingers. He tapped the screen. The video opened with a faint static hum, followed by the grainy black and white image of the ship's interior, the hold of the Golden Arrow. At first it looked almost ordinary. Containers stacked side by side, steel doors, dim lighting, nothing overt. But as the camera panned, the scene shifted. One container door stood slightly ajar. The lens zoomed. Inside, light from a hanging bulb revealed something that made Traoré's hand clench around the edge of the tablet. Gold. Bars of it, dull yet unmistakable, stacked unevenly. Some had markings, most did not. Their surfaces were rough, unpolished, real, raw, and very likely smelted in illegal foundries. Beside the bars lay burlap sacks filled with gold dust, their seams barely holding together. When a rat scurried over one and tore a corner, fine grains spilled like yellow smoke onto the steel floor. The camera shifted again, this time revealing a set of wooden crates marked as mechanical parts. One had been broken open. Inside, necklaces, bracelets, coins, and rings glinted under the flickering light. They weren't museum relics. These were freshly crafted, hastily packed. A rushed job, smugglers on a deadline. But what struck Traoré most wasn't the glitter. It was the absence of documentation. No labels, no customs tags, no serial numbers. The containers were ghosts in a system designed to register shadows. They were not just stealing gold. They were erasing the very proof of its existence. He continued watching. One camera caught a crewman cracking open another crate and scooping a handful of gold dust into a small pouch, grinning as he poured it into his coat pocket. Another clip recorded two men arguing softly over a manifest sheet. "You weren't supposed to list Site 14, one hissed. "Too close to a protected zone. You want them to trace it?" Site 14. Traoré knew it well. A restricted mining area in the north, supposed to be under government control, where dozens of illegal operations had been shut down last year. Or so they thought. He paused the footage. The silence in the room grew heavy, pressing against his ribs. He felt it not just as a leader, but as a son of the soil. His mind reeled back to the promise he made on the campaign trail, standing on a makeshift podium beneath a mango tree, telling farmers and miners that no more gold would leave their land unseen. And now here it was, evidence of a billion-dollar betrayal sailing off the coast under a borrowed name, invisible to every radar but one, his. He stood slowly, walking to the large map pinned on the wall. A red dot had been marked by his intelligence team, blinking off the coast of a neighboring country. The golden arrow was right there, still docked, still vulnerable. He didn't shout. He didn't slam his fist. His anger had moved beyond that. It had condensed into something sharper, cold, clear, and absolute. He returned to his desk, picked up the secure line, and called Soro. The captain answered on the first ring. "It's worse than we thought," Traoré said quietly. "Everything's in there. Bars, dust, jewelry, no paperwork. Some of it's from Site 14. A beat of silence. "Your orders, sir." Traoré's gaze never left the map. "Prepare for Operation Golden Justice." 3 seconds passed. "Yes, Mr. President." He hung up. Across the Capitol, encrypted orders began to move. Men in plain clothes received signals and drove without headlights. Drones were fueled. Old debts were called in. Phone numbers long dormant lit up with coded messages. At a warehouse near the coast, 3 more cameras were activated, this time facing outward, waiting for anyone who might try to silence the truth. Traoré looked once more at the paused image on his screen. A pile of stolen gold sitting quietly in the dark, like a coiled serpent, waiting to strike. Soon it wouldn't be hiding. Soon the whole world would be forced to look it in the eye. The city hummed with the rhythms of ordinary life. Vendors shouting prices at street corners, motorbikes weaving through narrow alleys, radios spilling laughter and local gossip. But inside the presidential compound, there was a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the windows. The truth had arrived, undeniable and searing. Yet it remained locked behind guarded doors and encrypted files. The nation carried on, oblivious to the storm coiling just beneath its feet. President Ibrahim Traoré stood by the window of his private study, watching the world pass by, his hands behind his back. He had never believed in rushing justice. Rage made good fire, but poor light. What was needed now was precision, timing, control. He had seen how truth, when revealed too early, could be twisted into a weapon. If he made his move now, before the full network was exposed, before the foreign agents were identified, it would be chaos. The smugglers would scatter, evidence would vanish, and worse, the very people he wanted to protect might never believe him, not without proof. He turned toward his desk and pressed a single button on his comm system. "Send in Miriam," he said. Moments later, the door opened and Miriam Doumbia stepped in, her camera bag slung over one shoulder, notebook already in hand. She wasn't just a journalist. She was the voice of conscience for a country that had grown numb from exploitation. Her reports had once exposed illegal mining near sacred burial grounds and corruption in school construction projects. Traoré had followed her writing long before he ever met her. In truth, she had inspired more than one of his campaign speeches. She stood straight but curious. "Mr. President, you asked for me?" He nodded, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "I have a story, but I'm not ready to tell it. Not yet." Miriam frowned slightly. "Is this about the coast? There are whispers. People talk." "It's worse than whispers," he said quietly. "It's theft, treason, centuries of suffering packed into metal containers and hidden offshore. And now we have it on film." Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She knew better. "I'm going to give this story to the world," he continued, "but not now. If we shout the truth before the foundations are in place, they'll drown it in lies. They'll call me a thief, a dictator, a madman, and the gold will vanish again." He leaned forward, his voice steady, calm. "The truth must wait, but it will speak loudly when ready." Miriam closed her notebook, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you need from me?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Be ready. When the time comes, I'll need someone who doesn't blink." As she left the room, Traoré turned back to the window. Outside, children laughed. Women bargained. Men argued over football scores. And none of them knew that for the first time in generations, the truth was being protected, not just by guns, but by patience. Burkina Faso held its breath, and history leaned in, listening. The wind had shifted by nightfall, off the coast of a neighboring country, where the Golden Arrow lay anchored in silence. The air had turned heavier, moist with anticipation, dense with the kind of pressure that precedes a storm. The sky was moonless, the ocean black as ink. From a distance, the cargo ship looked abandoned, its lights extinguished, its radar quiet, as if it were waiting to be forgotten. But it was not alone. 3 fast-moving patrol boats approached from the south, slicing the water with deadly precision. They moved without radio chatter, their engines tuned to low frequencies. On board, Special Forces soldiers in matte black uniforms checked their gear one final time. Silencers were affixed. Coordinates were locked in. No one spoke. The only sounds were the soft clicks of weapons being loaded and the rhythmic splash of waves against hulls. Captain Sorrow stood at the bow of the lead boat, binoculars pressed to his face. Through the faint veil of mist, he could just make out the silhouette of the Golden Arrow. The stolen wealth of a nation floated before him, guarded by men who thought the darkness would protect them. But Sorrow knew better. The dark didn't protect. It exposed. At precisely 1:03, his earpiece crackled once. A signal. Go. The 3 boats surged forward. Grappling hooks flew silently through the air, clanging against the steel sides of the ship. In moments, black-clad figures began scaling the hull like shadows reborn. By the time the first deck guard looked up, it was already too late. He barely had time to draw his weapon before 2 soldiers tackled him to the ground, zip-tying his wrists with practiced speed. In less than 5 minutes, the entire upper deck was secured. Below in the cargo hold, 4 crew members were caught attempting to move a container. They were shouting into radios, panic rising in their voices, but the signals were jammed. Flashbangs lit the narrow passageways in brief, blinding bursts. One by one, the smugglers were subdued. No gunfire, no alarms, just the methodical sweep of trained precision. Sorrow himself led the final breach into the captain's quarters. Inside, they found 2 foreign nationals, sweating, confused, hands raised. One of them reached for a phone. Sorrow kicked it across the floor. "Your ship is under seizure by the government of Burkina Faso," he said calmly. "Your gold, your silence, Your time. They're all up. By sunrise, the Golden Arrow had been fully secured. 23 suspects were in custody. 17 containers of unmarked gold, bars, dust, jewelry, were cataloged, photographed, and sealed. Satellite images confirmed every inch of the operation, and within an hour, encrypted footage was already on its way back to the capital. In Ouagadougou, the people awoke to something they had never seen before. Military helicopters in formation, sweeping low over rooftops, convoys of armored trucks headed for the National Treasury, and a digital alert lighting up every television and mobile device in the country. It was an emergency broadcast. President Ibrahim Traoré stood behind a simple wooden podium, flanked by his generals. He wore no suit, no medals, just a plain khaki shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes fierce. The nation held its breath. "My fellow citizens," he began, voice unwavering, "for too long, we have watched our land be stripped bare. Our people work while others profit. Our gold has lined foreign vaults, fed foreign banks, while our schools crumble and our hospitals run dry." He paused, holding up a single image, one of the containers taken from the ship, packed with gleaming bars. "This is what they tried to steal, in silence, in darkness. But we were watching." His voice rose. "Tonight, we take back what is ours, not just the gold, but our dignity, our voice, our future." Across Burkina Faso, cheers erupted. In markets, people gathered around radios, clapping and shouting. In homes, elders wept. Children pointed at the screen and whispered his name like a prayer. Even in the quietest villages, word spread faster than signal towers could carry it. The gold was coming home. But as the crowd celebrated, deep inside the presidential palace, Traoré remained silent. He knew the battle wasn't over. They had taken the ship, but what it represented was still out there. And somewhere in boardrooms cloaked in glass and lies, the real enemy was already planning its next move. By mid-morning, Burkina Faso was on its feet. From dusty villages tucked beneath baobab trees to the bustling markets of Ouagadougou, the news spread like wildfire. The Golden Arrow had been seized. The gold was real. The thieves were caught. The president had delivered. And just like that, centuries of silence cracked open. Drums pounded in distant provinces. Women ululated in the streets, waving headscarves above their heads. Children held up makeshift signs scribbled with chalk. "Our gold, our future." Men who had never trusted a politician in their lives shouted Traoré's name into the wind, as if daring it to echo into history. For the first time in living memory, the state had not only acted, but acted for them. Outside radio shops, crowds gathered shoulder to shoulder, replaying the president's speech. In mosques and churches, religious leaders praised the victory as divine justice. Young men scaled the gates of the presidential palace, not in protest, but to hang hand-painted banners. "We see you, we stand with you." In one border town, a miner named Adama crouched beside his father's grave and whispered, "They can't steal from us anymore, Baba. The gold is coming back." But far from this celebration, across oceans, past borders, behind thick glass and air-conditioned silence, the mood was far colder. Inside a boardroom in Geneva, 6 people sat around a polished table carved from African mahogany, its irony lost on them. They wore dark suits, silk ties, and expressions carved from disdain. The lights above them were dim, but the tension was bright and biting. A large screen displayed news footage. President Ibrahim Traoré holding a gold bar aloft, declaring the nation's triumph. Subtitles ran in 3 languages. One man stabbed the pause button with a gold-plated pen. "This is a disaster," he said. Another leaned forward, voice clipped in British. "That shipment was worth more than we reported to our partners, and he just made us the villain of an entire continent." A woman at the end of the table, sharp-eyed, lips blood red, tilted her head. "So let's change the story." The room turned toward her. She didn't blink. "If we make this about gold, we lose. But if we make it about him, about how he handles power, then we control the narrative." A silence, then a slow, collective nod. "What are you suggesting?" someone finally asked. She smiled. "We'll crush him with headlines." Within the hour, calls were made. Independent analysts were quoted. Editorials were drafted before facts were confirmed. A media firm in Paris was sent a simple directive: highlight instability, amplify division, question everything. Funding flowed discreetly to influencer accounts across West Africa. A prominent news outlet in New York received an exclusive tip. Sources suggest President Traoré may be hoarding seized gold for personal use. The machine moved like clockwork. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood at his office window, watching the people celebrate. But the reports were already coming in. An anonymous Twitter account posted, "Strange that the gold never reached the central bank. Where's the money going?" A foreign newspaper headline blared, "Strongman or Savior? Traoré's seizure sparks debate." A popular online magazine published a think piece titled, "Burkina Faso's Rising Star. Too bright? Too fast?" He knew the pattern. He'd seen it in other African leaders who had dared to take back control. First, they praise you for standing up. Then they question your methods. Finally, they turn you into the threat. Still, he remained composed. Let them throw shadows. He wasn't interested in winning the news cycle. He was interested in winning something far older, far deeper. He picked up the phone and called Soro. "How long until the convoy reaches the vault?" "Less than 2 hours," came the reply. "It's secure. We're sweeping for tracking devices just in case." "Good. No cameras. No announcements. Let the gold arrive in silence." He hung up, then turned to the small wooden box on his desk. Inside it was a compass, his father's. Old, worn, but always pointing true. For a moment, he let his fingers rest on its lid. Outside, the world screamed its headlines. But inside that quiet room, Ibrahim Traoré whispered to himself, "Let them talk. The people have seen more than headlines. They've seen hope. And hope, once awakened, is not so easily buried." The celebration barely lasted a day. By morning, the first whispers had already turned into headlines. It started with a single tweet from a faceless account, its profile photo a stock image, its followers suspiciously inflated. Sources say Traoré may have diverted part of the gold for private storage. Transparency, anyone? Within hours, the flames had spread. A French-language blog ran a piece titled, "Where is the gold now?" Traoré's silence raises alarms. An international newswire followed suit. Hero or hoarder? Burkina Faso's president faces new questions, overseas gold. And then came the avalanche. Social media filled with grainy photos of trucks, some real, some doctored, captioned with bold accusations. "The gold never reached the bank. Traoré is building a private fortune. Wake up, Burkina Faso." None of it was true. The operation had been tightly secured. The gold was under military escort, every container tagged and tracked. But truth had become a casualty of timing, drowned beneath waves of suspicion designed not to convince, but to confuse. In a downtown newsroom, Mariam Doumbia slammed her laptop shut with such force that her colleagues jumped. "They're turning light into shadow," she snapped. Around her, a few journalists looked away. One of them, a senior editor with graying temples, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It's just balance," he said quietly. "We're required to show both sides." "There are not two sides to theft," Mariam replied, her voice sharp. "We have footage, evidence, confessions, and instead we're publishing rumors funded by the very people who tried to rob us." The editor sighed, not meeting her eyes. "Some of our partners, they've requested a softer line. Advertisers are nervous." Mariam stared at him in disbelief. "So we lie?" He didn't answer. Later that evening, Mariam sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzing with message after message. Links to stories she hadn't written, headlines she didn't approve, analysis segments where her colleagues now echoed the talking points of foreign interests. People she had once trusted were accepting money, not openly, but discreetly. A sponsorship, a conference invite, a retreat. That was how it always began. She opened her journal and wrote one line across the page. "Truth is not neutral when justice is at stake." The next morning, she stood outside the gates of the presidential palace and asked to see Traoré. When he met her in his study, her face was pale with anger. "They're calling you a thief," she said. "They're reshaping the story before we even get to finish it." Traoré listened, nodded once, then replied quietly, I expected this, but we will not reply with noise. We will reply with action. Miriam's hands were shaking, not from fear, but fury, because she understood now. This wasn't just about gold anymore. This was a war for memory, and the headlines were the new battlefield. The gold was supposed to arrive by dawn. By every measure, satellite tracking, convoy timing, real-time ground reports, the armored trucks carrying Burkina Faso's stolen fortune should have reached the national treasury in Ouagadougou well before sunrise. But the minutes passed, then an hour, then two. The street outside the bank remained empty. The vault doors stayed closed. Inside the presidential compound, tension rippled through the halls like static. Staff whispered behind closed doors. Advisors huddled in corners. The room where Traoré waited was quiet, but the air inside it pressed down with the weight of unspoken questions. He paced, slow and deliberate, eyes sharp but unreadable. Captain Soro stood near the window, fingers moving over a small receiver clutched in his palm. Every few minutes, he lifted it to his ear. Still no update. What's the holdup? Traoré finally asked, voice low but edged in steel. They had a clear path. No changes. No threats reported. Soro hesitated. One of the lead trucks reported engine trouble outside Koudougou. But when we sent an aerial scan, there was no sign of mechanical failure. The truck was parked, not broken. Traoré stopped pacing. So it was waiting? Yes, sir. Just waiting. That one word cracked something open. Waiting. But for what? Or worse, for whom? Traoré sat at the edge of the desk and stared at the map pinned to the far wall. Dots marked each checkpoint the convoy was scheduled to pass. Koudougou was a quiet town. No history of rebel interference, no terrain challenges. It should have been routine. Instead, it was the first place where the timeline had fractured. Who approved the convoy route? He asked. Soro hesitated again. Technically, it went through my office. But the final logistics sheet was signed by Karim, Traoré finished. Silence. The name sat in the room like smoke, curling around the ceiling, choking any further conversation. Karim, his oldest ally, his trusted advisor, his brother-in-arms from the early days of resistance. They had shared foxholes and firewood, meals in the bush, and dreams of a freer nation. He had been with Traoré before the presidency, before the movement, when the future was just an idea they believed in more than they believed in sleep. Now the convoy was late, the gold was missing, and the man who knew every logistical thread in the operation had just signed off on the last route. Soro spoke carefully. We started looking into network activity inside the palace. Security teams flagged something odd. Several encrypted calls made from Karim's private office. Each one routed through a foreign proxy server. Traoré didn't blink. Who was on the other end? We traced one to a number in Geneva, another bounced through Côte d'Ivoire, but the third, Soro paused, was to a known associate of Delgado. Delgado, the foreign financier tied to the smuggling ring, the architect of a dozen shell companies, the man whose name kept appearing beneath layers of redacted wire transfers and buried influence. And Karim? Traoré asked. Still in the West Wing. Has no idea we're watching. The room fell into a long, heavy pause, the kind of silence that builds just before a bridge gives way. Traoré finally stood. He moved to the window and looked out at the capital, its rooftops gold in the morning light, its people waking to a day filled with hope that justice had prevailed. They didn't know that. Behind palace walls, doubt had found a crack in the foundation. I want full surveillance on him, Traoré said softly. Pull his calls, tap his staff, and check his wife's accounts. If this betrayal is real, it won't be clean. Greed never is. Soro nodded and left without a word. Traoré remained at the window, arms crossed, eyes hard. If it was true, if Karim had sold them out, then this wasn't just about gold anymore. It was about something far more fragile, trust. And once broken, it never shined the same again. He turned from the glass and whispered to himself, even the deepest loyalty must face the weight of truth. The air inside the West Wing was still, too still, like the eye of a storm that hadn't yet touched down. The guards stood taller than usual, their rifles resting but ready, their gazes locked ahead, betraying none of what they already knew. In the inner chamber, President Ibrahim Traoré waited alone, hands folded behind his back, eyes fixed on a photo hanging on the wall. A grainy black and white image from the early days of the resistance. In it, two young men, mud-splattered, hollow-cheeked but smiling, stood side by side, their arms slung over each other's shoulders. One was Ibrahim, the other, unmistakably, was Karim. They had once faced death together in the jungle, not knowing if the sun would rise on their revolution. They had buried comrades, slept on cold dirt, and shared one fire to keep warm in nights filled with gunfire and fear. Back then, there were no titles, just conviction and brotherhood. The door opened. Karim stepped in, dressed immaculately in his tailored gray suit, the contrast between past and present too sharp to ignore. His smile was easy, almost too easy. "You called for me, my brother?" he said warmly, as though nothing had shifted. Traoré didn't answer immediately. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Karim sat. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder with each second. Then, without looking up, Traoré placed a folder on the desk and slid it forward. "Open it," he said. Karim hesitated, his fingers resting on the cover as if he already knew what lay inside. Slowly, he opened the folder. Photocopies of bank transfers, phone records, surveillance photos, an offshore account in his wife's name with over $2.1 million in it. A contact sheet with Delgado's encrypted numbers. One call just days before the gold convoy was delayed. For the first time, Karim's smile wavered. "Ibrahim, this isn't what it looks like." "It looks," Traoré replied, voice steady, "like betrayal." Karim's hands trembled slightly. "You think I did this for money? You think I, after everything we've survived, would turn my back on you? On this country?" "I think," Traoré said quietly, "that people change, and I think power reveals what war once concealed." Karim stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. "You owe me more than this. You owe me trust." "No," Traoré said, standing to meet his gaze. "I owe the people truth. Even brothers must answer to it." The words hung in the air like a blade between them. Karim's shoulders slumped. For a moment he looked like the boy Traoré had once fought beside. Scared, proud, ashamed. He opened his mouth, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. A knock at the door broke the silence. Captain Soro stepped in, expression unreadable. Traoré nodded once. "Karim Dabo," Soro said, voice formal, controlled. "By order of the Office of the Presidency, you are hereby detained under suspicion of espionage, obstruction of national security, and conspiracy with foreign entities." Karim didn't resist. He straightened his suit, turned to Traoré, and offered a weak, almost mournful smile. "I never thought it would end like this." "Neither did I," Traoré said. When the door closed behind them, the silence that remained was different. Hollow, grieving. News of the arrest spread faster than wildfire. Social media exploded. Radio hosts gasped on live air. Television anchors struggled to maintain composure as they read the official statement. Presidential advisor detained amid investigation into gold smuggling leaks. Across the nation, the reaction was visceral. Some were angry. How could someone so trusted fall so far? Some were heartbroken. "He was one of us," a woman cried on camera. And others were simply afraid. If a man that close to the president could be corrupted, then what hope was there for the rest? But Traoré didn't flinch. That evening, he appeared briefly on national television. He didn't name Karim. He didn't raise his voice. "In the fight for justice, we must be willing to clean not just the streets, but the rooms of power. No one, no matter how close, is above the people." Then he paused, his voice gentler. "Even those we once called brother." And across the land, even among those who doubted, there was a deeper understanding. This was no longer just about gold. It was about integrity, and integrity demanded sacrifice. The discovery came not in a vault or encrypted server, but in something far more ordinary. A leather-bound notebook tucked behind a loose panel in Karim's private study. It was one of the security agents who found it during a sweep of his quarters, searching for any physical evidence to tie him more firmly to the betrayal. At first glance, it looked like a personal diary, handwritten, slightly worn, with coffee stains on the corners and pages that had curled slightly in the dry Sahel heat. But when they opened it, the contents hit like a hammer. Each page was carefully structured. Dates, locations, names, wire transfer references, meetings, and contact codes. Not the scribbles of a desperate man, but the precise handwriting of someone who had known exactly what he was doing and had kept a meticulous record of a slow, intentional betrayal. Captain Sorrow flipped through the pages in stunned silence as his officers stood behind him. There were references to planned delays in transport routes, notes about leak points inside customs offices, diagrams of bank routes across 5 countries. On one page, marked only with a small red X in the corner, was a list of 15 names, many of them familiar to the presidential inner circle: ministers, ambassadors, even 2 foreign consultants who had been seen visiting the palace under the guise of diplomatic business. But what chilled Sorrow to the bone wasn't the breadth of the conspiracy. It was the consistency of a single name repeated throughout the journal, like a thread tying the entire web together. Mr. Delgado. Sometimes it was abbreviated, MD or D. Sometimes he was referred to by code, architect, broker, or simply the voice. But there was no mistaking who it was. Delgado, the elusive mastermind behind the transcontinental smuggling network, a man with no fixed address, who existed in spreadsheets, conference calls, and encrypted offshore accounts. The same man who had appeared on intelligence briefings for over a decade, suspected of orchestrating gold and diamond thefts from across Africa, but never once formally charged. Now his name was in Karim's own handwriting, underlined, circled, and connected to specific payments. Sorrow wasted no time. He closed the journal, placed it into a secure case, and drove it himself to the presidential compound. When he entered Traoré's study, he didn't say a word at first, just handed him the book and stood back. Traoré opened it slowly. Page after page, his eyes moved steadily, without emotion. Only when he reached a specific line did his hand tighten slightly around the cover. May 4th, wire received from Delgado via third account. 2.1 million confirmed. Final favor approved. Delivery scheduled. Exposure must be prevented. Traoré closed the book and looked out the window for a long moment. The sun was setting, casting golden streaks across the city. The same gold they had nearly lost. Now, he said quietly, we don't just have betrayal. He turned to Sorrow, eyes cold and focused. We have proof, and we have a name. And in that moment, the war shifted from shadows and suspicion to something far more dangerous, a chase. And the one being chased had built a fortress of wealth, influence, and lies to keep himself untouchable. Until now. The crystal glass shattered against the marble wall, its echo ringing through the penthouse suite high above the lights of Geneva. Mr. Delgado, usually composed, moved with rage so palpable that even his assistants recoiled. Papers flew from the table, a phone slammed into the floor. Across the room, a muted television replayed a clip from Burkina Faso's national broadcast. President Ibrahim Traoré standing beside the seized gold, declaring victory to the world. Delgado turned, face twisted with fury. No more games, he spat. Eliminate him. No one in the room asked for clarification. They knew exactly who him meant. In a corner, a man in a dark suit opened a secure laptop and began typing rapidly. Another tapped his earpiece and gave a nod. The chain was already in motion. Within minutes, encrypted messages were sent through multiple relays, activating a contingency protocol labeled Black Veil. The objective was simple: take out Traoré, destabilize the country, and retake control of the narrative before the truth spread any further. The chosen team was already in place. 5 operatives handpicked from elite mercenary outfits across 3 continents. Former special forces, now loyal only to cash, trained in infiltration, sabotage, and assassination. Over the past 2 weeks, they had quietly arrived in Ouagadougou, slipping past border checks under fake diplomatic covers and NGO credentials. Each had a different mission: scout the presidential compound, test the motorcade routes, map emergency exits, monitor guard rotations. They communicated only in coded phrases and met only in crowded public areas. One worked as a driver for a food delivery company, another posed as a foreign journalist. The sniper had already rented an apartment with rooftop access overlooking Independence Square, where Traoré was scheduled to speak in 3 days. But plans that are meant to be silent often leave faint echoes. In the early hours of the morning, inside a concrete room beneath the National Security Building, a senior intelligence officer stared at a decrypted message just pulled from a foreign satellite sweep. The contents were chilling. Confirm contact. Fifth in place. Primary target. Head of state. Orders authorized by D. He ran to alert his superior, who in turn called the presidential residence directly. Traoré was still awake when the secure line rang. He had been reviewing the final list of names tied to the smuggling operation when he picked up the call. "Sir," the voice said, urgent but composed, "we have confirmed intel. They want to unalive you." There was a pause. Not assassinate, not kill. The operative had deliberately used the coded euphemism, unalive, meant to soften impact during sensitive calls. But Traoré understood. Fully. He didn't flinch. "Do we know how soon?" "Within 72 hours. They're already in the city." Traoré stood from his desk and walked toward the window. The capital spread out before him, flickering lights, sleeping homes, the quiet breath of a country that still believed it had turned a page. And now this. He returned to the desk and pressed a red switch on a panel hidden inside a drawer. A chime sounded in 3 rooms across the compound. Moments later, Captain Soro entered, fully dressed, already briefed. "They're here," Traoré said. "I know." Traoré exhaled, calm but firm. "Then we act. Quietly but thoroughly. No alarms, no panic. If they want to strike in silence, we'll trap them in it." Soro nodded. "Security detail is being rotated. Routes will be randomized. Staff are being vetted again." "And the speech?" Soro hesitated. "Sir, Independence Square will be too exposed." "I know," Traoré said. "That's why I have to go." Soro looked at him, expression unreadable. "They want fear," Traoré continued. "They want me to hide, to look over my shoulder, to doubt my own people. If I cancel that speech, they win. If I stand behind a bulletproof wall, they win." He looked Soro in the eye. "But if I walk onto that stage and speak to the people, they'll know we are not afraid." Soro didn't argue, he simply nodded. As the city slept unaware, security teams began moving through the streets, checking rooftops, tracking movement, sweeping phones. Dogs were brought in, drones launched silently into the night. The game had shifted again. Only now the stakes were no longer gold or politics. They were life or death, and the next move belonged to those hiding in plain sight. The sun had not yet risen, but the courtyard outside the presidential palace was already alive with activity. Officers moved with quiet urgency, checking radios, patting down uniforms, coordinating silently across channels that buzzed only in tight, secure frequencies. Armed convoys were repositioned. Sniper teams installed themselves in hidden vantage points. Drones lifted into the sky like silent birds, their rotors slicing the morning air. Dogs, lean and trained, sniffed along pathways, alert to even the faintest scent of explosives. Inside, the atmosphere was different. Still, composed, almost defiant. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the head of the briefing room, surrounded by his top security and intelligence commanders. Maps covered the wall behind him, layered with red markers, timestamps, digital overlays of Independence Square, where he was scheduled to speak that afternoon. The room was filled with facts, movement patterns of known suspects, intercepted foreign communications, rooftop scans, and threat levels rated severe. Logic screamed for caution. Protocol demanded postponement, but none of it moved him. Soro stepped forward, jaw tight. "We've identified 3 of the 5 operatives. One of them is believed to be stationed near the rooftop north of the square. The other 2 have rotated positions twice in 24 hours. We still don't know the 4th and 5th. "Can you contain them?" Traoré asked calmly. "We're confident we can intercept before they act. But no plan is perfect. Sir, we recommend delaying the speech, or at least delivering it remotely." Traoré was silent for a long moment. Then he walked slowly toward the window. Beyond the glass, the first hints of morning broke across the city. A soft orange haze settling over rooftops, washing alleys and trees in gentle light. He could already see people gathering at intersections, children on parents' shoulders, women adjusting their headscarves in the mirror of parked cars. They weren't afraid. They were waiting. He turned back, his voice low but unshakable. If I hide today, the dream dies tomorrow. The room froze. He looked directly at Soro. They don't want to kill me. They want to kill what I represent. If I disappear now, if I speak from behind glass or through a screen, they will win more than a battle. They will win the story. He began pacing slowly. I was elected not to survive. I was elected to lead. And leadership means risk. If the price of truth is danger, then so be it. The silence that followed wasn't dissent, it was respect. No one in the room argued. They all understood what was at stake. This was not just about security, it was about faith. If Traoré flinched, if he withdrew behind walls and whispers, the people would sense it. And once faith was lost, no amount of gold could buy it back. Sorrow finally gave a tight nod. Then we'll triple the perimeter. You won't walk alone. By midday, Independence Square had become the most secure place in the country. Every rooftop within a half-kilometer was manned. Civilians entering the area passed through scanners and canine units. Plainclothes agents mingled in the crowd. Emergency medical teams were stationed behind the stage just in case. The drones moved in lazy loops above, scanning heat signatures, analyzing patterns. A military chopper hovered just beyond visual range, and still the people came, in the thousands. They brought flags, hand-painted signs, radios, and tambourines. They brought hope, and above them, high in a building across the square, a man in a stolen uniform adjusted the scope on his rifle. He wasn't alone. The trap was set, and Traoré, fully aware, was walking into it, not to survive it, but to shatter it. The sun now hung high over Independence Square, casting sharp shadows across the concrete tiles where thousands of citizens had gathered. The crowd pulsed with anticipation, a living, breathing sea of hope. Women waved flags stitched by hand. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Vendors pushed carts of roasted corn and bottled water through narrow gaps between feet. Radios crackled from every direction, tuned to the same station. All waited for one voice, President Traoré. Few knew just how close death stood among them. Beneath the surface of celebration, 5 men moved with practiced ease. Each wore a different disguise. Each carried a role like second skin. One stood by the stage's edge, holding a camera with a hollowed-out lens hiding a pistol. Another perched on a rooftop overlooking the square. The barrel of his suppressed rifle, wrapped in fabric, concealed beneath a plastic sheet. A third had taken the uniform of a National Guard member, complete with forged ID. He moved along the crowd line, directing civilians with an authoritative wave and a fake smile. The fourth blended into the crowd, holding a large travel bag with false compartments, its contents as deadly as its carrier was calm. The fifth was still unaccounted for, even by the drones scanning the square. And that made him the most dangerous. From above, the scene looked peaceful. But in the mobile command center 3 blocks away, Captain Soro stood over a digital map pulsing with heat signatures and movement trails. His team had already identified 2 possible threats. One agent confirmed the presence of a rooftop observer, but hadn't yet moved to engage. Too risky to expose without coordination. Every second felt like glass underfoot. On the ground, Private Amadou, the youngest field officer on the operation, moved through the outer ring of the crowd. His eyes scanned faces, hands, posture, looking not for weapons, but for hesitation, fear, discipline, the kind that only trained killers carried under their breath. A man near the stage shifted oddly, pressing something into his ear. A brief whisper, a nod, a glance toward the side scaffolding. Amadou's pulse spiked. He pressed the button inside his sleeve, signaling, target identified, Sector C, possible shooter. The message was received. But there wasn't time to pause. Not when the president's motorcade had already entered the outer perimeter, its movement masked from the public. The black armored SUV glided behind the stage, out of sight, and Traoré emerged surrounded by a shield of silent bodyguards. His jacket was tailored, simple. No bulletproof vest that anyone could see, only resolve. Back on the rooftop, the sniper slid into position. Crosshairs settled onto the podium, now being adjusted by a staff member. He exhaled slowly, the same rhythm he had trained to since war first paid him to wait. In the crowd, the cameraman flexed his fingers. The count had begun, and only seconds remained between a speech that could change a nation or a silence that would bury it. The tension in Independence Square was invisible, but it was everywhere, threaded through the cheers, tucked beneath the rustle of flags, vibrating quietly under the applause of thousands. The people didn't know it, but they were standing atop a minefield of orchestrated violence, one heartbeat away from disaster. On the rooftop 3 blocks east, a sharp crackling came through a headset. "Subject confirmed. Target locked. Hold position." The sniper adjusted his aim, his eye locked on the center podium. Down below, a second mercenary moved toward the scaffolding behind the stage, his grip tightening around the disguised pistol in his satchel. A third walked with false confidence, wearing the uniform of a National Guard officer, moving freely among true soldiers. The fourth, embedded among the crowd, casually scanned the perimeter while fingering the zipper of a bag containing a homemade detonator. But the fifth, the deadliest, was already standing less than 10 meters from the president, blending in perfectly behind a camera mounted on a shoulder rig. His hands moved naturally, controlling the lens. But inside the hollowed-out casing was a concealed short-barrel pistol, cocked and ready. As the president's armored convoy rolled silently into the rear of the square, his team remained calm, focused. Captain Sorrow, watching from the mobile command center, tracked the drone feed overhead. 4 blinking red icons marked identified threats. Code names: Vulture, Blade, Ash, and Ghost. The first to fall was Vulture, the rooftop sniper. A drone had picked up the heat signature of the weapon, and 2 operatives disguised as rooftop tech workers closed in fast. In a flash of silent movement, the sniper was disarmed, zip-tied, and dragged off before he even knew he'd been spotted. 30 seconds later, Blade was intercepted while heading for the scaffolding. A decoy security guard tripped him accidentally, allowing a second guard to detect the weapon concealed in his boot. He resisted briefly, but a swift blow to the ribs brought him down. Ghost, the fake National Guard, was the hardest to spot. It was Private Amadou, young, quiet, alert, who noticed him giving hand signals inconsistent with real protocol. A hushed code word was sent through the network, and within minutes, Ghost had been neutralized and removed from the perimeter. The fourth, Ash, was caught thanks to an eagle-eyed K9 unit. The dog, reacting not to explosives but to adrenaline, barked and lunged toward the man with the bag. Within moments, Ash was down, his detonator seized, his plan undone. 4 out of 5, but 1 still stood, and he was closest of all. On stage, the president took his first step toward the podium. The crowd roared. Flags rose. The cameraman adjusted his angle. His hand moved toward the side of the rig, toward the hidden trigger. His eyes locked onto the president's heart. And then, "Gun!" The voice cut through the square like a blade. It was Miriam, eyes narrowed, heart pounding, lips trembling. She had seen the flicker of hesitation, the unnatural twitch. The way the man's fingers moved not like a cameraman's, but like a trained killer's. The moment she screamed, everything erupted. 2 security officers leapt toward the stage. One slammed into Traoré, knocking him to the ground. The second tackled the shooter just as he raised the barrel. The pistol discharged once, harmlessly into the air, before being wrenched from his grasp. The crowd gasped, some screamed, but no one ran. Not this time. The would-be assassin fought wildly, but he was subdued in seconds, pinned beneath the weight of justice, fury, and fate. And then, silence. The president rose slowly, brushed dust from his jacket, and looked toward Miriam, who stood frozen, hand over her chest, breath shaking. He nodded once, grateful, steady. Then he turned back to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and raised his voice. "Even now, they try to silence us, but we are not afraid." And the crowd erupted, not in panic, but in pride. Burkina Faso had survived. Again. The sound of the gunshot had barely faded when President Traoré rose from the stone floor, the dust still clinging to the shoulders of his jacket. Around him, guards held their breath, eyes scanning for any second threat. Behind them, the subdued assassin was dragged away in silence, the weight of failure etched on his face. But Traoré didn't look back. He stepped forward, one foot, then another. The crowd, stunned and silent, watched with wide eyes. Time seemed to slow. Children clutched their mothers. Some elders bowed their heads, thinking they had just witnessed history unravel. Others whispered prayers under their breath, afraid to speak louder than a heartbeat. Traoré reached the podium, his hand lightly brushing the wooden surface. The microphone had fallen sideways during the scuffle, but it still worked. He adjusted it with a calm, deliberate touch. He stood tall, no helmet, no glass shield, only a thin layer of dust across his face, and the fire of conviction burning brighter than ever in his eyes. Then he spoke. Even now they try to silence us. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, raw and heavy. But we are not afraid. The square shook. It began with a ripple of clapping, hesitant at first. Then it surged. Hands met hands. Feet stomped. Voices rose, some breaking into tears, others into full-throated cheers. From the back of the crowd, a woman fell to her knees and began to sing. A song of the old village mothers, once buried beneath years of colonial grief. Her voice cracked, but it lit a spark. Others joined in. More women, then young men, then the children. A chorus of defiance swelled in the open air, not choreographed, not rehearsed, only real. Old men raised their fists high, eyes glistening. Vendors wept beside their stalls. Teenage boys who had once thought politics was just speeches and lies now stared with something close to reverence. Miriam stood frozen, her eyes filled with tears. She had shouted "gun" with everything she had, expecting a body to fall, but it was hope that rose instead. Traoré's voice continued, strong and unwavering. They want to break us. They want our gold, our land, our silence. But they will not get them. Not today. Not ever again. He stepped out from behind the podium now, walking closer to the edge of the platform. This land belongs to you. This gold belongs to you, and our future, it belongs to no one but the people of Burkina Faso. And with that, the square erupted. Flags waved with renewed meaning. Strangers embraced. Some wept openly. Others shouted his name again and again, as if to tattoo it onto time. The mic had stood. The man had stood. And so had a nation. No assassin, no bribe, no lie could erase the truth that had just unfolded in front of them. Not even death had dared interrupt it. Because when the people are awake, even bullets lose their power. And in that moment, all of Burkina Faso was wide awake. By nightfall, the world was watching, not through whispers or forged headlines, but through unfiltered truth. The footage of the assassination attempt had gone viral in under an hour. But it wasn't just the chaos that captured hearts. It was the moment that followed. The image of President Traoré standing, brushing dust from his suit and finishing his speech with unwavering calm. International broadcasters who had once run skeptical editorials now struggled to spin the scene. There was no room for interpretation. A man had faced death, stared it down, and chosen defiance over retreat. And his people had answered not with fear, but with roaring unity. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, something even more historic unfolded. Interpol, acting on the contents of Karim's journal and cross-border intelligence, issued a global arrest warrant for Mr. Delgado. His name and photo flashed across screens from Geneva to Johannesburg. Once a ghost operating behind shell companies and offshore accounts, Delgado was now a fugitive, no longer hiding in shadows, but hunted by the light he had tried to extinguish. Inside Burkina Faso, the ripples moved faster and deeper. A full list of traitors, officials, businessmen, foreign agents, was made public. One by one, they were arrested. Some tried to flee. Others turned themselves in, hoping for leniency. But the nation was no longer in the mood for half measures. Justice had found its momentum, and alongside it, something rarer bloomed: trust. For the first time in generations, citizens looked at their government and saw not a machine of power, but a reflection of themselves. They saw dust on the president's jacket and recognized the same soil beneath their feet. They saw guards who dove in front of bullets, journalists who shouted to save a life, and officers who worked not for salary, but for country. And most of all, they saw their gold, not hidden, not stolen, not sold, but returned. No longer trapped in cargo holds or secret vaults overseas. It was home, visible, real, a future finally reclaimed. Children sang about it in schoolyards. Elders spoke of it as prophecy fulfilled. Burkina Faso had not just recovered its treasure, it had rediscovered its soul. And from village radios to city towers, one truth echoed clear and proud. The lion had roared, and the world had heard. The stolen gold, once hidden in rusting cargo holds, now bore new life. In a forgotten village nestled between parched fields and thorny paths, a brand new hospital opened its doors. The walls gleamed white, the beds were clean, and for the first time, babies were born not in darkness, but under light. A mother clutched her child and whispered, "This is gold that breathes." Elsewhere, a school for girls, once a dream too fragile to utter, now stood proudly in the red dust. Laughter echoed from classrooms. Chalk scribbled across blackboards. A young girl, Amina, raised her hand in class for the first time. She smiled, and in that smile lived a future no longer stolen. In the north, new roads cut through the dense brush, linking forgotten villages to the city. Trucks carried medicine, food, and books. Men once unemployed now worked on bridges and power lines. Drones flew above, not to spy, but to map and build. The country was stitching itself back together, one brick at a time. The gold was no longer just a resource. It had become a promise fulfilled. Standing before the national flag, President Ibrahim Traoré addressed the world. The cameras zoomed in. The silence was electric. Millions tuned in, from Accra to Nairobi, from Harlem to Paris. They stole our gold. They told us we were poor while they grew rich. They never built your schools. They never fed your children. But we will. He paused, letting the truth settle. This gold is not mine. It is yours. And so is the future it builds. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with fire. We were called unstable, corrupt, hopeless. But now, let the world see. Africa is not sleeping. We are not victims. We are the storm that remembers. The broadcast cut through borders. It went viral overnight. Africans around the globe wept, clapped, and reposted. Artists painted murals. DJs remixed his words into protest anthems. Children repeated his speech in school plays. For the first time in a long time, a leader from the continent spoke not just for one country, but for all. That night, the streets of Ouagadougou were calm. There were no parades, no gunshots, just peace. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré sat alone, pen in hand, writing in his journal. The gold had been secured. The traitors were gone, the mercenaries behind bars. But he knew the fight wasn't over. We can rebuild roads, but trust takes longer. We can defend borders, but dignity must be defended every day. He looked out the window. Somewhere children were still awake, watching, believing. Then he wrote the last line of the night. Never again will we sleep with eyes closed. As the ink dried, the camera panned out, rising above the palace, the city, the land. A voice echoed softly across the screen, as if from the future. Let this be a lesson to the world. Africa is awake. The lion had risen. This story isn't just about gold or politics. It's about reclaiming what was always ours: truth, dignity, and hope. I'm inspired by how one leader's integrity became a mirror for his people's strength. The most powerful revolutions often begin with quiet defiance. So I ask you, if your voice could change just one thing in your community, would you be brave enough to use it? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, It includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.